As people are settling in and grabbing pizza, welcome everybody to today's MindCORE seminar. I'm Florian Schwartz from the Linguistics Department, also the Associate Director for Education of MindCORE. It is my great pleasure to welcome Elitzur Siegal here today. He's a professor at Hebrew University, received his PhD at Harvard in 2009. Elitzur works on historical linguistics, semantics, syntax, and various specific topics like negation, reciprocals, possessives, and causation and causatives, which is what we'll hear about today in broader terms. Elitzur is extremely interdisciplinary, so an excellent fit for the MindCORE context. In fact, he's so interdisciplinary, he's currently enjoying the perks of an appointment visiting here in the law school. I'm not sure we've had a law school affiliate present here, so MindCORE just became so much bigger, and I hear they have lots of fancy things like free food.
Yeah, I like to say that I'm a law professor.
We should go over there sometime. Yeah, I think that's about it in terms of introductions. It's a great pleasure. He's only here for a brief stint for 6 weeks, and I think it's 2 more left. If you want to chat with him, seek the opportunity while it lasts. We're really happy and fortunate to have him here. And I'll turn it over to Elitzur. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing it. Whoa, so many screens. I don't know where to look. So I'll try to focus on this one, but yeah, we'll play with it. Okay, so causation. So this is, by the way, a joint work with Jörg Hagemeyer. He's a cognitive scientist. And so this is, I think, I'll try to show some collaboration that actually started from a project that we had with a philosophy department at Hebrew University. And then it became more interdisciplinary. And so I will speak today about the interdisciplinary aspect of this study. I will present some experimental stuff, but I will try to come back to the big question that how much we can actually learn from the linguistic fact about the cognitive aspects of causation. Oh, what did I do wrong now? Of course. Yeah, okay. So just a brief introduction about what do people do when they study causation in each field. As always, when we ask a question, who was the first one to ask to deal with causation? What's the answer should be? Always, when someone asks you a question, who was the first? Try Aristotle. That's always a good guess. So, as always, Aristotle was the first one to ask what causation is. However, he had a different notion of causation. Interestingly, some people think that basically his notion of causation was whatever the proposition because does in Greek. So that's actually what made his approach to causation. But when we talk about causation, we usually talk about David Hume, who, since David Hume, basically the idea was people ascribe causation in the world all the time, but we actually don't see causation. So as someone who was an empiricist, he said, we need to actually understand what leads us to attribute causation to things. In his case, it was really a thing. So basically, the idea was to reduce, and that's the project of philosopher, to reduce causation to other terms which are more available to us. So some, actually going back to Hume, the idea is that we identify similarities between, he didn't call it, but we will call it events, and we identify that there are laws that actually govern, there are regularities between certain events that if one happened, the second one also happened. So therefore, we ascribe causation to this. Since then, philosophers try to take the notion of causation and reduce it to other terms, to other concepts that are more available for us or are more basic, or that we can actually consider that we have some approach to them. So this discussion started in philosophy and somehow affected other areas. And in a sense, I put the arrows this direction because historically this is how it went. And both linguists and psychologists try to apply these methods to their perspective. So in psychology, people ask, what are the models that capture causal reasoning? To understand, to try to find ways in which people ascribe causation and basically to see how, and in many ways they try to apply notions that come from philosophy and try to see whether we can actually identify how they are actually the way people ascribe causation. And we will see today, I will mention some of those approaches so you will be, in a few minutes, you understand better. What do linguists do? Linguists cares about expressions. I'm speaking specifically about semantics because there is a lot of work also in syntax. But in semantics, basically, we identify, and I will talk in a few minutes, what do we mean by that? Linguistic expressions that express causal relations. And then we try to see what's the semantics of this expression. For linguists, and now I'm making a very broad generalization. Well, everything was here so far without of it, but we're looking for truth conditions. So basically, what are the conditions in the word, let's say, or in the model, that must take place so that it will be true to say a certain expression? And basically, what usually linguists did when they spoke about causation, they said, okay, let's pick a theory from philosophy. So there was a famous linguist that his name was Dowdy. He said, oh, what's the recent famous paper in philosophy? It was Lewis' work on causation. And he said, let's pick whatever the philosopher said that this is the meaning of a certain causal expression, and let's assume that this, and probably if we have expression that express causal relation, probably their truth conditions will be equivalent to what the philosopher tells us that this is what causation is. And we don't have a lot of time, but I think what happened in the last 10 years is that all these bubbles start to shift. More independent studies are done in linguistics, more independent done in psychology, and somehow we actually go back and tell a philosopher, well, you were wrong in the way you actually ask your question. And maybe some of your questions are actually not philosophical questions, they're actually linguistic questions. And maybe some of the work that linguists did is actually more philosophical questions. So there is a very interesting play here between this discipline that try to really have a serious interdisciplinary study. I think this is a very good area where you can actually see how when we start asking different questions, we may actually find out that our questions were not well articulated, and maybe we should change some of the things. Okay. So basically, the notion of causation, when people ask causation, or if you take a class in philosophy about causation, or if you ask how to reduce the notion of causation to other terms, the way it is asked is as a binary relation between cause and effect. So we identify certain event, and we think that this is the cause of another event, and then we ask what should happen, or what are the conditions, or that actually make what are the conditions that lead us to ascribe causal relation between C and E. However, causation is never so simple, because basically, for something to happen, so let's stop for a second and ask yourself what causation is. So we will think about, well, we will use different terminology, but we will think, the cause is what bring about the result, or something like that. But for something to happen, really rarely you have one event that leads to that event. So it's a combination of many conditions that lead to that result. So let's take this example. Actually, I know it's funny because only in the US, if I put this picture, you immediately know what I'm talking about. But basically, let's take a case of an automatic door. So usually what happens, we press the button, and then the door opens. Okay? But for this to happen, we need a series of other conditions to be fulfilled. So we need that the door will be unlocked, because if the door is locked, it doesn't matter if we press the button or not. So this is what we call a negative condition. So if something is, as long as, if it's happening, if it's locked, we cannot. So we need that the door, one of the causes, one of the conditions for the door to be open is that the door will be unlocked. We need actually electricity to run. So if we press the button, there is no electricity, nothing will happen. And only then we have the pressing of the button that opened the door. Okay? Now, somehow we make this distinction that the pressing of the button is the cause, and the fact that the door is unlocked or that the electricity runs, this is an enabling condition. But once we will start thinking about what causation is, if we use regular definition of causation, there won't be a real reason to make a distinction between the first condition and the second and the third condition. So actually our lecture is, our discussion and most of my publication is about this example. So what I'm thinking all day long is about pressing the button and the door that is open. Yeah. Very interesting life. But I'll try to, at the end you will see, I hope that this is enough for have a serious discussion about causation. Actually, if you look in the literature, most of the cases are squads that kill people. I don't know why this is usually the, or people poisoning each other. That's always the examples in philosophy. But we linguists, we care about opening of doors. So this is what we're going to talk. Okay. So basically, what we will say that all of these are conditions, and somehow we select one of the conditions to be the cause. And this is a process that is responsible for my job at the law school, because the first one to call it causal selection was a book about causation in the law, that they actually ask when someone is doing something wrong in tort law, there is a set of conditions, and somehow we pick one of them as to be the cause of someone that is reliable, that is responsible. So actually, this literature started in legal literature, or this terminology of causal selection. But the idea is that causal selection is basically, if we think about the logical relationship of necessity, or we will talk later on about counterfactuality, all these conditions are equivalent. All of them are exactly equally necessary for the result to take place. And only together they lead to the result. But somehow we select the pressing of the button to be the cause. And this selection, the question is how exactly we make this selection. So the way, and basically there will be terms that are actually not necessarily about causation. There will be an additional consideration, like responsibility, who norms, foreseeability, just one second, that will lead us to, it will be an addition to the definition of causation, this will be the reason to select a certain condition as the cause. Yeah.
Because there is always a subject in the law. So like when a cause can be always attributed to subject, or even if it's an event may have been previously caused by a subject who was responsible for so it's from complete or something, or like generally there is no such distinction. Or is this distinction between subject as a causal force and objects as an able condition kind of generally?
You're right and you're wrong. So first, you're right that clearly when we talk about legal context, only the subject matters. However, something that actually already philosophers in the Middle Ages noticed. We tend to ascribe causation more if one of the condition is an agent. We will select. There is a tendency to select this agent as the cause. So maybe we actually have a tendency to attribute causation in general to subjects more than other elements. So, and actually, we find out in experiments that when there is an agent, it affects also our linguistic judgments. So sentences, certain conditions that we will be enough to use a certain expression if the subject is not an agent when we're speaking about linguistically. So I don't know, the water broke the stone. We don't need a specific event, unlike if I tell you the person broke the stone. So there is a different also truth conditions when it has to do with the subject. So you're right, but we can actually strengthen your claim, and maybe it's not only. It is true that, and we have here some law students. So this is actually something that we discuss in our class a lot. To what extent the legal discussion is different, and to what extent it's not. So, but actually, if you look at the literature, you will see that many of the observations by Hart and Honore from the book Causation in the Law, actually, after many rounds, we go back to their observation, and apparently they're stronger than just how the judges or make the decision who is the cause. But so thank you. Okay. So now that we know that there are many conditions, we can actually model the causation. So we can actually, you remember our case of door? So now this is how we look when we model it. And then we can actually use a mathematical machinery that's called structural equation model. Perl is known for these models. We can actually describe them as graphs. And then we don't say a lot. We just show the direction of the conditions. And we can actually use certain equation to show what will be the results. Or we can use them also as entailment relation. So when we speak, and that's how we will apply them when we talk in a linguistic way. So basically, we take each condition to be a proposition. So if we think about the opening of the door, we need that the door will be unlocked. We can need that someone will press a button, and in this way will close the circuit, and we need electricity to run. Each of this bubble, we can take them to be a proposition. And this proposition can be either true or false. So 1 if it's true, 0 if it's false. And then we can actually see the relationship between the bubbles, what we call the causal relations, as entailments. So these are not logical entailments. These are word knowledge entailments. But basically, we think that if the value of the button is 1, so meaning the sentence, the button is pressed, is true, then we can entail that the circuit is closed is also 1. Okay? And we can entail that if the door is unlocked, is 1 or 0, depends what is the 0 and what is the 1. And circuit is 1 and electricity is 1, then there is an entailment that the door is open. What is interesting about the case of the door, that there is more than one way to get to the result. So we can either press a button to open the door, or we can actually use the handle to open the door. This is a way to compute causation. And that will be a way, actually, and now I'm talking to the linguists among you, to actually provide a model theoretical approach to causation if we adopt this mathematical model and we basically make this to be what the model is according to which propositions are true or false. So I'm not going too much into it. I'm just showing you how it works. But I want you to actually, for those of you who study philosophy, this can remind you a very interesting work that was done in the 60s by Mackey about causation. And Mackey said that cause is what he called an Inus condition. So each one of these bubbles can be an Inus condition. What is an Inus condition? An Inus condition is insufficient but necessary on its own, unnecessary but sufficient together. So basically, each of these condition is necessary for this to happen. But it's insufficient so it's insufficient on its own, but it is sufficient only together. All the orange things together are sufficient for the result to take place. However, they are also, as a set, they are sufficient but unnecessary because there is an alternative set that is also sufficient. So the set its own is sufficient but unnecessary because there are other ways to reach to this result. So we will play with this notion of Inus condition and with the notion of necessity and sufficiency to get to some linguistic observation. And ideally, if I will manage my time properly, I will try to actually go back and show that there is something deep about the difference between the approach that focuses on necessity when we speak about causation and when we speak about sufficiency when we speak about causation. And the goal, what I will try to show you, the different linguistic expressions are sensitive to different elements of this big system. And that basically what languages show us is the fact that cognitively we sometimes focus on different elements of causation when we when we describe causal relation, and that many of them are relevant, but not always in the same way. They're all logically relevant, but we have different focus when we use different linguistic expression. So somehow the idea will be that even though, so just to give the big picture, the idea is that the linguistic expression rely on the general cognitive ability to attribute causation. But at the same time, the way we use our language actually tells us something about different aspects of causation that are important cognitively and relevant cognitively to the way we actually perceive the world. So there is here, on the one hand, we show how the linguistic architecture rely on something broader cognitively, but on the other hand, it's also a way that tells us, it serves as a mirror to show us how we actually perceive or what is crucial for the way we ascribe causation. This is a good time to pause, and if you have questions, to ask. Yeah.
Basically, this effort seems to address what humans put into the colloquial notion of causality. So, like, we use the word causation, but so this looks like an effort to understand what causation means by human. But if that is true, then wouldn't it be natural enough in language?
Would it be natural to what?
Mapped on the language. But like efforts seem to actually grasp what is meant by causation in language.
It's a very good question again, and I'm not sure I will be able to actually give you. I'll just give you the direction, and hopefully after the talk you'll have some better answer, but I cannot. No, this is a 2 hours lecture on its own to answer this issue. But at the end of the day, so in very recent paper that Rebecca Baglini and myself we published in Linguistics and Philosophy, we actually our claim is that philosophers missed many discussions in philosophy were not about causation, but were about the semantics of linguistic expressions, and they were wrong in the methodology basically that they took. So that's always. But on the other hand, that there is still a philosophical independent question that can be asked. And but once we see all the options, we can actually have a better understanding of what is the philosophical question that is not necessarily depends on a specific linguistic expression. And to make it valid, the idea is that this will explain to us how we can actually shift from one expression to another and understand each other. So that will be, so that's direction. Now, if you missed this last correspondence, this is the time to come back to the to the talk. Okay. So this is this is the paper, and basically we take this. So what we do is we take this notion of necessity and sufficiency and provide some logical mathematical definition to these notions. I will not do it here, but we try to give a very regressive, very analysis using Mackey insights to provide very defined, like definite definitions or definitions to necessity and sufficiency. But now you will have to believe me. What do we mean by that? Okay. One thing which is important is there are a lot of people who talk about sufficiency in when they speak about causation, and you probably are familiar with this distinction between necessary condition and sufficiency and sufficient condition. It's important to emphasize that in our approach, following Mackey, sufficiency is not a characteristic of a condition. It's a characteristic of a set of conditions. So together, these two orange ones are a sufficient set for this result. Together, all the above orange one are sufficient set to get a certain result. Okay. So what I will try to do now, so we spoke about causal selection, and basically what our project tried to show that at least in part it's a linguistic phenomena shaped by how causal relations are expressed through different constructions. So basically, when we select a certain condition to be the cause, it is not the case that there is only one way to select it. It depends on which linguistic expression we use, and each linguistic expression may affect the way we select a certain cause, and we will call it causative construction selection, which will be the choice of a construction of constructions used to express causal relation. So why all of this matter? And this is going back to a very old question in linguistics, that there is this somehow asymmetry between two ways in which we describe causal relation. So we can say John killed the sheriff, and we can say John caused the sheriff to die. We say we go back to the 70s, already people are killing and dying. That's how causation is usually, these are the examples. So if we say John killed the sheriff, we can infer, so this is an entailment, that John caused the sheriff to die. But if we say John caused the sheriff to die, it's not necessarily the case that John killed the sheriff. We can think of, for example, if John told someone to shoot at the sheriff, the other person will kill him, but John did not kill the sheriff, he just caused the death of the sheriff. So that would be something that we actually see. So we may consider John to be the cause, a condition, but only one way we can describe it and the other way we can't. So what linguists will ask is what the semantics of cause and what the semantic of change of state verbs. So verb like kill, verb like open, are verbs that we call them change of state verbs, meaning these are verbs that describe the results. They do not describe the action. So when I say John killed, they can shoot, they can throw stones, they can, I don't know, put them in the water, but we don't know. When I'm telling you that someone ran, you know I'm describing what they did. So change of state verbs are verbs that are ascribed to someone due to the result. There is nothing about them how they actually do the action. Unlike other things that we actually, if I'm telling you that someone brushed the room, you know that he did something like that. If I'm telling you he cleaned the room, you know that at the end of the day, the room was clean, but you don't know how he did it. Okay, now, usually in the literature, the distinction between kill and change of state verbs is that one of them require what they call, so the change of state verbs require direct causation, which is somehow additional prerequisite that there will be some closeness in space and in time, more than what is required with the verb cause. Recent studies by Neilman and Van der Koot demonstrated that this is very problematic. These assumptions are very, very problematic. It's very hard to actually defend this claim. Okay, what do I mean? I'm stopping for a second. What do I mean by causative constructions? So causative constructions will be basically somehow expressions that we can divide them to C, which is the cause, well, it's not the cause, and an E, two events that say somehow have in their sentences two events, and that there is a dependency between them. So we can use something like overt causative verbs like make, cause, enable. We can use change of state verbs like open, boil. We can use preposition like because, from, by, as a result of. That's enough for us. So I'm not actually arguing that all the cases in which I use the preposition because will denote what we call a causal relation, because can actually be used to other things. But I am arguing that we will be able to identify in all of them this dependency between two states, events, situations, propositions, something like that. But basically, as linguists, we will ask, okay, so what should be the D? Is it a causal relation, maybe a grounding relation? There is a set of relations that can be relevant for this linguistic expression. We will focus on those. So there is an F that is missing there. For a given set of conditions and an effect, we ask which linguistic expression are available to a speaker to describe the dependency between a member of the conditions and the E. So the idea is now that we take something very similar to causal selection, but we ask it now in a different way. We say, okay, given that we have a set of conditions that we identify in our model as necessary condition for the certain result, and that together they create a sufficient set for this result, now let's take a certain expression, cause, and see which of the conditions can be selected to be the subject of this sentence. And which, let's take the verb open. So could we use all the pressing, whether someone who just put the electricity to run on, we would say that he opened the door? Or if someone in the morning unlocked the door, will we be able to say he opened the door? Can we say that he caused the opening of the door? Now, that will actually lead us, so we will be able to use the model and the condition in the model to see which of them can be applied, can be the subject, can be the causes in this expression. And de facto, it will give us the truth conditions of this expression. So we'll be able to actually use methodology that linguists use all the time to do semantics. So what will happen now is that we will take different elements that are in the literature, and we will see if they are relevant for the semantics. I will start running a little bit because we're running out of we're already 40 minutes into the talk. So I will start a little bit, not to go with every detail, but to give you the big picture. So just to give you the sense of what we're going to argue, you remember our example of the door. So we have two sentences. So Mary pushing the button, or the button or Mary caused the opening of the door. And we have electricity opened the door. Okay, we will check all of these cases, and we will see which one are available and which one are not. And somehow, I assume, if we had more time, I would give you the time to respond. Now, I hope that you will agree with my intuitions about the judgments here, that somehow to say Mary pushing the button or the button, or Mary open the door if she is the one who pressed the button is fine, but saying electricity open the door is not good. And here, actually I think it's a mistake. I want to say cause the opening of the door. It will be fine to say actually electricity caused the opening of the door. So in certain contexts, if we care, it will be fine. And then the question is, what will make B a legitimate sentence? And what will happen is basically, that if for some reason someone already, let's say this is not the type of button, that we have a button that you just have to put it on and off, but electricity didn't run, and someone turned it on, but electricity didn't run, and someone actually returned the electricity or put the electricity, they will be the one to open the door. So the idea is that a sentence of change of state verb is accepted more when the causal condition, being the subject, completes a sufficient set of conditions for the effect. So what is required in all these cases is we pick the last condition. So if this are on and this one is still 0, and it changed from 0 to 1, if this is the last one to complete the sufficient set, that is what is required for to use the change of state verb. And this is not, and when we speak about cause, we can pick any of the conditions to be the cause, to be the subject of the sentence. So there is a different requirement that will be the one that completes a sufficient set. What we did, so a statement with a change of state verb is accepted less than a statement with an overt causative when the causal condition, being the subject, does not complete a sufficient set of conditions for the effect. Okay, so this is a very complicated way to describe it. That's what we do after. Always, like in semantics, we take simple stuff and just make them ugly. So that's how semantic analysis will look. And we will have to define a lot of elements here, what exactly we mean. But this will be the goal of a semanticist. At the end of the day, to take all of this and to formalize it, and to formalize a way that we can actually capture the truth conditions. And that's actually the 2020 version. In the 2025 version, it becomes even uglier. It's like 3 lines to make it. That's what happened when proceeding papers go through reviews. You get 5 more lines. But yeah. Anyway. Okay. How do we check it? So we actually ran an experiment to see if this is the case. So we take a certain, this is the model. We take context in which there are certain actions, 2 actions that must be done together to get a certain result. And so both of them are necessary, and together they are sufficient. And what we do is we try to see, we ask people in a certain, like when something happens last, whether they can, so let's take something that we check. So the number one supermarket locks its automatic doors at 8 o'clock to prevent new customers from entering. Yesterday at 8:15, an employee of the supermarket unlocked the main door while cleaning. When a father and his child walked by the number one entry, the child came close to the door trying to look inside, the door open. So we understand that we need someone to go next to the door, and we need that someone will unlock the door for the door to be open. And basically we ask people, participant, which of the following description actually fit or describe appropriately. I'm not going to say how exactly, so whether it fit or describe appropriately, it actually matters a lot. But let's say that we find a good way to ask this question. And then we give them 4 options. The number one employee opened the door, the child opened the door, the number one employee caused the opening of the door, and the child caused the opening of the door. So we check 2 factors here. We check the order, so whether we pick the first condition or the second condition, and the other factor is the linguistic expression that we use. And nicely, we get the results that we wanted, that in general, lexical causative is affected stronger by the order than the acceptance of overt causative, and statements referring to the first condition are accepted more with an overt than a lexical causative. So basically, it supports our hypothesis that somehow change of states verbs are more sensitive because once we do experiment, nothing is nice anymore. It's more and less. But basically, we get this, that order has a stronger effect with change of state verbs and with the verb open rather than with cause the opening of the door. This was nice. For some reason, we tried it again with different description and more sophisticated ones. So a lab team handling highly aggressive substance label GS4 purchased a new fridge with a refined safety technology. The technology helps to prevent the GS4 gets into contact with the cooling agent of the fridge, which may cause an explosion. Therefore, the fridge has 2 sensors. A fume detector measures whether there are particles of GS4 in the fridge interior, while leakage detector identify whether cooling agent is spilling into the fridge. The compressor of the fridge automatically stops when the following 2 conditions are both realized. The leakage detector is activated. The fume detector is activated. That means that only when one condition is realized, the composer continues to work. So that's the causal model. We basically provide the causal model because this is not something that we could rely that they knew. And then we have a story that someone came, did something that activated the first condition, and then someone activated the second condition. And we checked both in the description of event. Basically, the activation of the fume detector stopped the compressor, or the person, Tobias stopped the compressor. This is related to your question, what happened when we do agent. Actually, here we didn't find any effect. And so we checked the order, and we checked the construction, and we didn't get a nice result. So that was very sad. So we said, okay, let's try to see why in the first experiment we had the results. Actually, our hypothesis was confirmed. In the second experiment, our hypothesis was not confirmed. And maybe what were the differences between the first experiment and the second experiment? And basically, I mean, it was clear that in the first examples, we use scenarios from our regular life, but we tried to see what in their regularity, what in them, what evoked the difference between the 2 experiments. And basically, so somehow we realized, for example, that in the case of the supermarket, there is some asymmetry between them, because the guy who unlocked the door, we can blame him. The kids who just wanted to enter the supermarket, we cannot blame him. So that's, for example, something that we could see. Or the fact that when the guy unlocked the door, he could foresee that someone will come. We try to find what will be, and then to isolate this condition. And then, so we ran an experiment, with violation of norms. So we gave examples in which the first agent violates a norm, meaning did something that he was not supposed to do, or the second agent violated the norms. And then we found out that with change of state verbs, this has less an effect, but with the verb cause, there was more effect. And then we checked foreseeability, whether the first person could foresee the fact that the result will take place, and the second one did not. And then we realized that somehow, and in this case, it actually affected both constructions. Not exactly in the same way. I will not go into the details here. So what we realized that actually order is always a factor in both constructions. So also with the verb cause, we prefer the last one, but not necessarily, but not always. And then violation of norms is more a factor for overt causative, like the verb cause, and foreseeability has more effect, has effect on both constructions. I will not go into all the details here because I don't have enough time, and I want to actually show you. So basically, what does it say about the semantics? So given that the speaker wished to describe the dependency between the member of condition and effect, which of the linguistic expressions are available for her? So basically, it looks, at least from our studies, I didn't show you here, some additional information that are required. At first, it has to be an inus condition. It must be a necessary condition within a sufficient set to be able to use this expression. But when it's among other conditions, it's not enough. And so when we speak about overt causative, we care which one has more responsibility, which of the conditions we can blame. So that's actually elements that can actually affect the preference among the conditions. And there are different parameters maybe for responsibility, order, agent violation, agent foreseeability. But for change of state verbs, it looks that there is a stronger requirement for completion of a sufficient set. And then we ask ourselves, okay, why? But sometimes it can be violated if there is foreseeability. And now why foreseeability can be a reason to actually overrun the require for sufficiency. So one way is to look at it if something is foreseeable. So maybe this is actually the perspective that we actually evaluate which condition happened last, and that's what I'm actually wanting to show. So I did it fast, but because I want to emphasize on other things. But beforehand, we also needed to make sure that it's about actually a completion of a sufficient set and not just being the last condition. So the experiment so far were actually equally, if what we care is recency, just being the recent one, or if we have the one that completes a sufficient set. So we made a much longer sets of conditions. And if it will be recency, the development should be all the time equally, like the later the condition is, it should be more preferable. But if we care about sufficiency, then there should be a big gap between the sets not a gap between the sufficient set and the sets which complete and those which are not. And we saw that, so I'm doing it really fast because I want to actually get to the next point. But what we saw is that if you want, I can show. If you want me to explain more, I can do it later. That somehow with change of state verbs, it seems to matter a lot whether it's part of the sufficient set and not only whether it's recency. Okay, now why I'm doing all of this? Basically, what I want to explain now is that all these conditions that we mention now, which are foreseeability, blameworthy, violation of norms can actually go into the notion of counterfactuality. And I will use work by philosopher like Josh Knob. And then I will try to clarify two notions of causation that we have. Okay, so if you lost me in the last few minutes, I'm starting from, at this point, from a point where we can rejoin. So the verb cause, basically, it looks that order matter, but other things can also matter. It can be violation of norms. So the condition that if there is one of the condition violates some norms, doing something that he or she were not supposed to do, we will ascribe causation to them. Or if they could foresee that the result will take place, we will ascribe causation to them even if they are not the last condition. What brings all of these conditions together? So it's a work that started with Josh Knob, and then if you look at the literature in the last 8 years in philosophy and in cognitive sciences, a lot of them take this direction. It's the following. According to Lewis, I mentioned his name before, the way we ascribe causation is basically something very similar to the notion of necessity, but he talks about the notion of counterfactuality. What does this mean, counterfactuality? Why do we think that pressing the button or electricity is a condition for the result, for opening the door? We basically imagine a world in which the electricity did not run, or that someone had not pressed the button. And we say, had he not pressed the button, the door would have not been open. Therefore, this is a condition for the result to take place. This reasoning is called counterfactuality. We imagine, and Lewis insert the notion of possible words, and he said, let's imagine a word which is very similar to ours, in which someone did not press the button. It's identical to our word, just without pressing of the button. In this case, we actually have to make another change in this word. The door would not have been open. So these two things they're necessary together. Therefore, this is a condition for the result to take place. This is the notion of counterfactuality. What Knob and other people said, it's basically the following. So we take Lewis' idea that judgments rely on counterfactual thinking, imagining words where the event did not occur, and asking if the outcome still would. And only such alternative words are considered. This reasoning underlies causal judgment, but the idea is the following, that many things could happen. And when we actually make a causal, what does it mean to make a causal attribution? Is we somehow, for some reason, focus on certain conditions, and we ask ourselves what would have happened if they did not take place. And then once we think about it, we ascribe causation. What do we mean by that? There are tons of things that if they did not occur, the result would not take place. But if someone violates a norm, psychologically, we ask ourselves, oh, let's think about a word in which he did not violate the norm. Or in general, we go backwards and we look for the last condition. So this is the recency effect. We just go backwards and we say, oh, if this would have not happened, the result would not happen. And we stop there because this is the first step that we actually think about them. So basically, all the notions that we just use, recency effect, abnormality, foreseeability, these are reasons to have the counterfactual reasoning. So he take all the reason for causal selection, and what they make them as reasons to make the counterfactual reasoning. Okay? So this is what happened with all these cases that we basically involve stimulating alternative words and their possible futures. We think what would happen if this did not happen in the past. A cause is selected when an event consistently leads to another in these words. And basically, he says that we emphasize alternative paths, what could have happened instead of the cause. So basically what we do is, this is what happened. We go backwards. And sometimes we pick certain conditions and we think about whether they had alternative futures. So for example, we can, once there is a violation of norm, it makes us think about this condition. And then we see if there is an alternative future that would not lead to this result, we pick this to be the cause. Or usually we just go to the last one when there is recency effect. This is what happened with, this is the notion of counterfactuality. We basically identify a necessary condition, and for various reasons we pick them, and then we think whether if they had alternative future, if they did not take place, we pick them as causes. There is another way in which we think about sufficiency. In sufficiency, we don't go backwards. We actually go from here and we ask ourselves at which point we knew that the result will take place. That's the notion of sufficiency. The notion of sufficiency tells us at which point all the necessary conditions that leads us to a certain result were fulfilled. And this is important because, for example, if there was a deterministic relation between this and this one, already here we could know that the result will take place. So, and this is a notion actually maybe of foreseeability. So in foreseeability, if at some point we could actually have a clear idea that the result will take place, even if not all the conditions already fulfilled, this could lead us to actually make a prediction that the result will take place. So the idea is the following, and here I'm summarizing, that if when we check overt cause and causative and change of state verbs, they actually, each one of them requires a different way, each one of them involve a different way in which we conceive causation. When we speak about overt causes, we care about necessary conditions. We care more about counterfactual reasoning. And then we go backwards in time and we look at which event in the past, if this event would have not taken place, whether we had alternative futures that will actually lead us to a different direction. And if this is the case, then it can be selected. And all this, and then we have various things that lead us to actually have a reason to select this as the cause if these are reasons to actually apply the counterfactual reasoning. But with change of state verbs, what we care is actually at which point in the past the future was determined. And once we have this, so at the point in which we could predict that there could be still alternative future, but at the point where we could predict that the result will take place, this is when we can actually we can use change of state verb. So if we have, for example, a chain in which someone presses a button and this closes the circuit, we can, at the point in which they press the button, we knew that the circuit will be closed. So we can use both pressing the button open the door or closing of the circuit open the door. Last thing. And this is to answer your question before. I wanted, oh, I didn't remember it. So this is, or if I'm here, I can actually go back here already. Sorry. This is the model. This is the real causation. Okay? This is what is required for a certain result to take place. It is independent of the way we describe it linguistically. It's a way that we can independently think about the word, and we have scientific knowledge, we have social knowledge, we have whatever knowledge we have about what the conditions are for a certain result to take place. We have a way that we actually map the word, and we can model it in a mathematical way. That's the real causation. Now come two phenomena. One is purely cognitive, that somehow certain events, we tend to select them as the causes. We thought that this is an independent cognitive ability, cognitive phenomena that we have. And apparently, it depends on which linguistic expression we use to describe the word. And what I just told you about necessity and sufficiency, these are all elements that are built in the system. But the way, for each linguistic expression, there are different rules which of this condition can be selected to be marked as the cause. And this will be, I just used a cognitive way, which of these conditions can be selected as the cause for a certain linguistic expression. From the linguistic perspective, this is equivalent to what are the truth conditions for this expression. And once we use it, this is what we call in linguistic semantics. So in a way, we can actually bring together all these areas of what is causation on its own, and what are the cognitive aspects here, and on the other hand, what are the linguistic constraints. Okay? That's it. I'm done. I just need to give some pictures of who is in this. Yeah, just I'll get there. But if you have questions, that's the time to ask. Why it's so slow? Yeah, I just want to have some thanks here, acknowledgement. But if you have questions, that's, oh yeah, here it is. So these are the people who were in this project, and yeah, they enabled.
Thank you for this really interesting talk. I was wondering about the effect of the internal structure of the event that causes so it seems like, at least for change of state verb to change of state event, and it sort of fits in with your theory of like, completion of causes. If there is a completion of causes, there's presumably at least, well, not always, but there's a different, and so for example, the opening of the door, the electricity is a state, right? Electricity on, unlocked door is a state, but then pushing the button is a change of state. So it seems like there is, that's the thing that basically the only event that can complete, the set of events in order to provoke the caused event, unless like the electricity is turned on. So I mean, I was wondering like whether you pretend that sort of leads me to another type of situation where the caused event is not a change of state caused by simultaneous states. So I don't know, maybe like heat and water cause evaporation, presence of heat cause like humidity or something like that, and how yeah, what have you thought of those situations? Like, it seems like if you need both at the same time, linguistically, like it's weird to say the heat humidifies the air, or the water humidifies the air, but the heat and water humidify the air.
Yeah. So I'm not sure about the second one. I have to think a little bit more about it, but I will actually say a few things about your questions. So first, I will not use the terminology of internal structure of event. I prefer to speak about a set of proposition, and it actually gives us some, because yeah, so that's the way the model is organized. I will not go back another half an hour, but it's about propositions. So there is here actually a distinction between the model, which is about propositions, and causal statements that are about relations between events. And then we pick one of the, so a propos, now we actually have a relevant definition of events here that are related to change of state verbs and other expression like that. And this is the notion of actually, we can actually say that what is prerequisite to be an event that can be selected as the one that completes a sufficient set is an event in which there is a change of value from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 0. So that's exactly your point. So it is true that in most cases pressing the button is a clear one of 0 to 1, but unlocking or locking the door can also be 0 to 1 or 1 to 0. And similarly, electricity. So it is true. So the reason why when I gave you the example, it's very clear for everyone that's pressing the button, because this is a typical one in which we are familiar with cases in which the 0 to 1 or 1 to 0 happen. So, but that's exactly your point in a sense. So this is a way to actually capture it. Once we speak about values of proposition, their truth value, it actually gives us a way to capture the relevant notion of events for change of state verbs. About the second one, this is an empirical, very interesting question. So it looks like, now I'm just saying that in this case, it's actually, models are not only about 0 and 1. They can also have about plus. In many cases, we actually need a reaction of two things. So it could be that the type of events that is relevant here, the proposition that is relevant is not having air or having, it's about having air and together. So that's the relevant one, and for this specific model. So we need a plus. That's the notion of equation. We can actually make them exactly like equation. So in this case, it will be clear why. I don't know. We have to check it empirically. It might. So I don't know if it was very clear that something was there and something was a ditch. Like we waited for something, so we can say, oh, finally the water came and evaporated, or whatever it will be the case. So I'm just thinking that if sometimes both of them, so we need, it always counts when both propositions shift from 0 to 1, then we must mention both of them. So that would be the direction, but it would be very interesting to check them empirically. Thanks.
So I'm curious, right? So you highlighted the way that the linguistic descriptions with the cause construction and change of state verbs like open pick up sort of on different aspects of the underlying model structure. So do you think there's something deeper in terms of the patterns of which sort of conditions and what ingredients get lexicalized into these change of state verbs, like versus which ones are these more paragraphic constructions? Is there something stable, maybe even across languages, and does that form in an interesting way about a condition of it?
It's actually, something very distinct, remote from this, made us think about this. Because there is a whole phenomena about knob effect, how people are usually ascribing causation for bad results. And then we found someone from philosophy actually came with something that she wrote in her about the way we ascribe causation to God. And apparently, as we ascribe causation to God, we have the reverse effect of knob effect. So if there is an accident and people die, we won't say God killed them. Religious people don't say God killed them, but if someone was saved, God saved them. So people ascribe causation more to God when there is a positive result. This led to an examination of the Bible by another student that she checked when the Bible used change of state verbs to describe God's action. And apparently it doesn't happen a lot. Which led us to think actually about your question. In what way? Because somehow it looks like we need to know the prescription of how the result is taking place to be able to use change of state verbs. So if we know about causal relations, that we don't really know how they happened, it looks like we don't like to use change of state verbs. So that's a very long way to actually come back to an observation by Anscob, the philosopher. And she actually said something very similar. So now we're actually trying to check everything I just told you in an experiment. It's very hard to do it, but in a way, that's the direction. That's a very long way to answer your question. And it has to do also with the progressive, because it looks like once we know what the procedure, we can use the progressive. And it leads to the imperfective paradox is related to that. So in order to be able to talk that we are in the progress, we need to know what the stages are. So I think that's a direction, but yeah. That's what happened when you do interdisciplinary studies. People are coming, and then you find yourself answering questions about the Bible. And
Maybe one more question.
We have another. Oh.
Made this distinction between this independent model of causation and how we language attribute causation. And I'm wondering if our cognitive abilities to predict what is positive for some better purpose. Is there a notion of using sort of these looking for these recency type bias and such in more mathematically the SAT solver? Can we improve those by incorporating these sort of more cognitive?
Yeah, so that's actually the work that so basically when Pearl presented, there are two ways actually how to look about these models. One is how we construct the model, and one is, given that we have a model, how it is used, for example, to provide truth conditions. So there is a lot of, given my linguistic perspective, I take this model as something that is already formed, and how we use them to understand each other or to speak about causation. Because usually when people converse, they actually assume that they share causal knowledge and how what the model of the word. The other approach is actually, and some of the cognitive studies are there. Basically, you can take everything that I tell you about the logical features of this model, and then you can see whether this is how actually experimentally, you can see whether this is how people, you can reverse it with the way that you compute whether something is a condition or not. And if we do it, that's actually a way to capture the cognitive way also of building the model. So actually, in our long paper, there's a long footnote that actually tried to show how Pearl Schultz, this is someone who did in computer sciences that had application to link. So basically what they call is counterfactual reasoning. And basically to see that actually in many ways, these two approaches somehow come together. Just to make it a little bit a place that can actually be different, and this is really going very, when we build this logic, it's actually a trivial, like we have three values, 0, 1, and u. 0 is false, 1 is true, and u, now what is u is actually whether it's uncertain. So if we care about the semantics of expression, we want to compute when someone is actually uncertain what's the state of affairs in the world. Because we can make, sometimes we can make, if I know that the door is locked, I can actually predict that the door is not open, even if I don't know whether someone pressed the button or not. So I can actually build a model with u that can actually predict the result. But if you actually care about the way you build if you think about the way you create the model, then the u will be different. It's not u that you know what the model is that when you still don't know whether it has an effect or not. So that will be a different, that's the only difference if you take these two different directions.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. Thank you for this fun talk and the great discussion. Thank you.